What's up, guys, and welcome back to Bass Fishing Tips. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about my favorite lure of all time, and that is the frog. I want to give you guys some tips on frog fishing that have helped me to just catch more bass on a frog, because I think a frog is one of those lures that a lot of people have trouble with. They don't really understand where it applies, and I think a lot of the times we isolate it to a really particular set of circumstances, when in reality it can be used in a way broader set of circumstances than, again, the box that we put it into. Now, before we get into that, I just want to remind you guys about my ebooks. Now, if you've not checked out my ebooks, I've got a variety of ebooks, but the one I want to talk to you guys about today are my bass fishing field guides. And what the field guides are over 30 different individual, essentially one-page cheat sheets for bass fishing. And I've got them for all kinds of different techniques: crankbaits, chatterbaits, topwaters, frogs, flipping, pitching, jigs, the list goes on and on and on. And so a frog, for example, what you're going to get in that bass fishing field guide is you're going to get the rod, reel, and line recommendation to throw it on. You're going to get the areas, including the cover and structure, to throw it around, what colors to choose and what water clarities and around what forage types, and then 5 to 6 different retrieval techniques. And that's just for the frog, and there's over 30 different field guides available. So I'll have everything linked down below in the description, the pinned comment. You guys go give it a gander if that sounds like something you're interested in. Now, without any further ado, let's talk about the frog. So like I said, I think we box the frog in a lot of the times. And the reason for that is, a lot of people, when they think frog fishing, they think fishing around vegetation, which is 100% true. This is probably one of the best tools, if not the best tool that we have for fishing aquatic vegetation, whether that be lily pads, whether that be matted, vegetation like we see in the fall, or even right now I'm seeing matted vegetation around my house because of the drought, or whatever it may be. When we think frogs, we think vegetation. And again, it's one of the best tools. But for me and where I live, and for a lot of people and where they live throughout the country, the ability to fish in the grass is a time frame about that big. But open water frog fishing is something that we can extend out, and there's just a lot more circumstances and places that we can fish that frog in open water, doing that walk the dog, or walk the frog as I like to call it, action, and get those bass to bite. And so that's kind of what I want to focus in on first, is start to broaden your kind of understanding of where the frog is actually useful. So obviously, like I said, matted vegetation, aquatic vegetation, lily pads, all that kind of stuff. Yes, fish frogs there. I'm not saying don't fish a frog there. I'm not saying it's not effective there. It absolutely is. One of my favorite things to do is get a blow up in a mat on a frog. But when I think about summertime bass fishing, when I think about summer transitioning into fall, some of the best topwater days that I've ever had in my life have been fishing a frog in open water. So I'll tell you a quick story about a time that I just had an incredible day of open water frog fishing. I was actually fishing in a kayak tournament. It was late summer, kind of, the time frame we're starting to get into now, super hot dog days of summer. And these bass were up shallow using these really, really hard shade lines. And the thing was, I'd throw a wacky rig at them, they wouldn't bite it. I'd flip in there, they wouldn't bite it. I'd throw the glide bait at them, they wouldn't bite it. All they wanted to do was come up on top and eat up on top, because it was a mayfly hatch going on. So they were eating those mayflies, they were eating the bluegills, eating those mayflies. And so I had to throw something on top. But the problem was, these bass were so far up under these overhanging trees that there was no other topwater lure that I could get in there and then walk out of there in the way that I needed to, other than the frog. And so because of that, the weedlessness of that frog, right? Because when we think about the frog, it is one of the most weedless baits that we're going to run into. We can get this thing in and out of pieces of cover like no other bait in our arsenal. And so I was able to skip that frog way up over those overhanging trees, up over limbs, up into these brush piles where these bass were hanging out, eating these bluegills, eating these mayflies. And I actually ended up coming, I think, in second in that tournament, between one big key fish that I caught in the morning on a glide bait, and then the subsequent other like 15, 20 fish, culled up a bunch, all throwing the frog. And again, it was because it was the only topwater lure that I could get up under that overhanging limb and up over, tree limbs and stuff like that, and get it back out of there. Because you got to think, with other topwater lures, they can be super effective, and they absolutely are. I'm not saying throw them away. by any means. I love topwater, so my topwater box is thick. So is my frog box. It's kind of ridiculous. But what I am saying is that unlike those other topwaters, you know, again, this thing's completely weedless. There's no treble hooks hanging on below. We can skip it. We can throw it. We can just do things with that frog that you can't do with any other bait. And so really expand where you are willing to fish the frog and how you're willing to fish the frog. Don't just isolate yourself to aquatic vegetation. It is a bait that you can use in open water. You can use it up shallow. You can use it around docks. You can use it overhanging limbs, throw it up around brush piles. Just essentially anywhere you can't get any other topwater, you can throw the frog in there. You can present those bass with a topwater, and they're going to be able to eat it. Now, I want to kind of talk about colors of frogs because I think sometimes color really matters, especially with a frog. And I don't say this very often with very many lures, right? Oftentimes I say, you know, with a bait, a bass looks at the color last. But I have seen times when bass want one in particular color or another. And so I want to kind of discuss some scenarios where I've seen these different colors be effective, how they were effective, and why I think that they were effective in actually getting those bass to bite. So first we're going to start with just a all white frog or bone. This is actually what this color is. The biggest time that I've seen the bone or an all white excel is two situations. Number one, anytime those bass are feeding on shad. If the bass are focusing on shad primarily, then the white frog is going to excel. Great example of this, I was fishing Lake Gunnersville a few years ago during the shad spawn. The only topwater bait that I could get up into these like reeds and like cattail kind of mixed with lily pads and get it out of there was that frog. And this was the bait that got bit the most because it was the one thing that mimicked those shad the best. And so the white really is, I think, key when you're fishing around shad more than say bluegill or something like that. And depending on which lake around me that I'm going to, they could be primarily shad dominated or primary bluegill dominated. And I know when I'm on those primarily shad dominated lakes, I'm going to pick up the white. Another time that white does really, really well is on overcast days. Those kind of days when it's dingy, cloudy, rainy, you know, it's going to be harder for those bass to see a profile on top of the water. The white seems to get bit more. And I just think it's just one of those things, you know, it's kind of a general rule of thumb. Bright, sunny days, use those darker profiles. You know, cloudier, kind of dingy days, use something that's more opaque, that kind of stands out. And what's really fascinating is when you put this thing on top of the water, how it almost has like an aurora or a glow on those cloudy days. And I think it's just because that white stands out really well. And so those are the two scenarios where I see white working the best and where I've had the most success on white. The next color is going to be, you guessed it, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, just a straight black. Now I want to put in a little caveat here. I believe if you were only to choose two frog colors, white and black are the two that I would go and pick up. So if you go to Tackle Warehouse right now using my links, I would pick up white, I would pick up black. I think you can go fish 99.9% of frog fishing situations with those two colors. Anyway, black is anytime I'm fishing around bluegills or essentially anything other than shad. If those bass are focusing in on anything other than shad, I'm going to pick up a black, and that's what I'm going to throw. Another scenario where I want to pick up black is on the sunny days, the complete opposite to the white. Those bright sunny days, that solid black frog is going to create the best profile. It's going to create the best silhouette, and those bass can just see it really, really well. We've talked about this on this channel before. I believe black is probably the most underrated color in bass fishing. And if you only had to choose one color for the rest of your life, I believe black could do about dang near anything and dang near any water clarity because it just stands out so well. You know, you got to think a bass really is a visual creature in how it feeds, and as long as it can see whatever it is that it's trying to eat, it can eat it. And so black does the best job of standing out not only in the background that the fish is looking at it, but it also contrasts the water, contrasts the sky, contrasts the skyline. I mean, it's just a great contrasting color. And so black is one of my favorite colors because of that. But the black frog in particular, bright sunny days. You got to think when that sun's shining right down on that thing, just like a freaking great white going after a seal. You ever seen those documentaries? They just use a big black seal, and it's because it creates a good hard silhouette for those, those great whites to take advantage of. It's the same thing with the bass. And if you notice, when they do that, it's on sunny days. It's because those great whites can actually see better on those sunny days, just like a bass can, which is very, very interesting. Also, man, if bass blew up on baits like you see those sharks blow up on seals. Anyway, the last color is going to be a translucent color. And this really, for me, was something that blew my mind a few years ago. Again, fishing in a tournament, and there was a mayfly hatch kind of mixing with a little bit of a shad spawn, but there was a lot of pressure on the lake, and the water was really, really warm. It had warmed up really, really quickly, and so by the end of the day, the water was in the mid to almost high 80s, and these fish were just getting a ton of pressure. They were seeing a ton of frogs, and I tied on this color. I literally picked this up at a tackle store, and you guys can see, you can almost see completely through that bait. It's like this translucent yellow color. Now, I don't think the yellow in particular is what got them to bite, but I do believe there's something in the translucence that got them to bite. And what I've noticed is when the water gets really, really hot, or when I'm fishing really, really pressured bodies of water, the translucent colors that let that light penetrate through them, seem to excel beyond any other color that I've got in the box. And so it's just something to keep in mind. This is an anecdotal personal experience to me, but it's something that I don't not have some sort of translucent color in the box. Now, even like that green pumpkin, you guys can see that light penetrating through that green pumpkin. Something that light can penetrate through seems to be one of the best frog colors when the water's really hot or when the bass are really pressured. It seems to get them to bite when nothing else will. And so that's something just to kind of keep in mind, keep in the back of your head. Put it in the Rolodex ideas that you have, that if you're fishing a really pressured body of water, try those translucent colors. Now I want to talk about rod, reel, and line, because this is a topic that I get questions about. There's a lot of people that ask questions about what they need to fish their frog on. They make frog fishing specific setups, you know what I mean? So for me, I kind of keep it pretty simple with my frog fishing setup, but I think it's worth, mentioning and kind of talking about. So I just fish a standard 7/6 heavy fast action casting rod. This is literally the same rod that I would use to flip and pitch with. It's the same rod that I use to drag Carolina rigs or big jigs with. It's just nothing special. It's just a standard 7/6 heavy fast action rod. And the reason that I go with that is for a couple reasons. Number one, I've got all the power that I need to do about dang near any job that the frog needs to do frog fishing. Whether that's matted vegetation, it's lily pads, or it's just getting them out from under a dock or over a tree limb, I know that 7/6 heavy will do it. Now, there's a few scenarios where I might change it. And I only really do that is when I'll bump up the size of the rod. I will go to a 7-11 heavy or even extra heavy fast action if I'm fishing super, super, super thick vegetation. Again, Guntersville Lake a few years ago, the mats were crazy thick. And I was hooking these bass and these bass were coming off. And so I bumped up my rod. And honestly, it was hard for me to cast my frog because of how heavy this rod actually was. But it was what I had to have to get those fish hooked and get them out of those mats. Again, that's a rare situation, right? Now, it's worth noting, but it's still a rare situation where you probably aren't going to run into that. And so for 99% of the other times that I'm not doing that extreme of, sort of frog fishing, 7/6 heavy fast action casting rod, just keeping it pretty simple. Now, I'm going to be fishing a 50-pound braid. I really believe 50-pound braid will do about dang near everything you need it to do. Now, I like 50 for a couple reasons. Castability. 50-pound braid just casts the best of the braids for me. The bigger the diameter of the braid, a lot of the times I find you're not getting enough line on the reel to make good long cast. And being able to make good long casts on matted vegetation or just across a lily pad field or whatever. But then if you go too low, you go into a 30 or a 40, I still think you could do the same job. That line diameter then, though, drops to the point where I fight the line more than it helps me. 50 seems to be kind of that middle ground where it casts really, really well. I still able to get casting distance, but I've got all the strength that I need to get them in or out of anything that I want to get them out of. And then the second reason that I use 50-pound braid, and the primary reason I use braid 100% of the time, I never don't use braid with a frog, is because braid cuts vegetation. I think this is like the biggest misunderstanding about braid and what braid does. Braid is essentially a braided rope, right? That's why we call it braid. It is designed to cut through and to saw through vegetation. And that's the job that it does the absolute best. And so because of that, I'm always going to choose braid with a frog, because if I am fishing around aquatic vegetation, I know that when I hit that fish, it's going to cut through that vegetation a lot of the times. It's going to help to clear that bass out of that vegetation. And then you compound that on the fact that it's dang near unbreakable and has zero stretch. You're going to be able to get a good hook into those fish's face and then get the fish out of essentially whatever they happen to be in. I think a lot of people just don't understand why, especially if you're new to bass fishing, why in the world would we fish such heavy line? And a lot of it has to do with just the diameter for castability, and then the ability for it to cut through vegetation and just have the strength to get them out of that vegetation. I don't know if you guys have ever done it. I know I have. Hooked a 6-7 pound bass in matted vegetation. You're not just bringing the 6-7 pound bass out of there. You're going to bring 10 pounds of grass with them, and then you got to dig through that grass and find that fish. And so having that braid helps you to cut through that grass, get as much of that grass cleared out of the way as you possibly can, and then any grass you do bring with that fish, you're going to bring it with them. You're going to get them into the boat. So that's why we use a braid. And then the reel. I'm just using a 7-gear ratio reel. Nothing really special here. I do like a reel with a big old power handle on it. This is the Abu Garcia Inshore Revo reel, and I literally like it because it does have that big power handle. I can get my big bear paw on that thing, and so when I got to crank them out of that grass, I can absolutely do that. Obviously, you don't have to have that. That's just a preference, but a 7-gear ratio reel. That way, if one hits it, runs towards you, you can reel up that slack, get a good hook set into them, and again, kind of leaning back on that braid. There's zero stretch in that braid, so you almost always get a good hook set into them. But just, I don't know, 7-gear ratio. It's what I like, it's what I use. And that's kind of my primary frog setup and kind of why I choose it. But yeah, there you go, guys. That's really I think the biggest things I want to talk to you guys about frog fishing. Fish it in open water. Make sure you're choosing the right color. Experiment with some of those translucents, and then make sure you're throwing it on the right gear. And if you're doing those 3 things, I think that you guys are going to be able to expand your frog fishing, kind of where you see the frog being effective. You'll be able to catch some more bass on it. If you guys enjoyed this video, click this video. It's popping up right here.